Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenour, and today is another day of some more baseball news and topics, and really everything in between. Hope everyone has been doing well and staying safe as always. I'm actually getting really excited because a show my girlfriend and I started watching a while ago, and I think I actually mentioned this one time on the podcast. It's called Big Sky. It takes place, I believe, in Montana. It's got a great storyline. I think two girls, they get kidnapped, and it kind of goes from there, right? It's just a small town in Montana, and it's got this wild plot behind it. And everybody that's watched it that I know absolutely loves it. There's one season out, but they've only televised the first part of the first season. So the second part of the first season is going to be coming back on TV on January 26th. So very excited for that. Very much looking forward to that, and very much looking forward to just getting back to some really good, solid TV show, right? I mean, I feel like there hasn't been anything great on TV in terms of a good show to watch and just to kind of follow and get behind. But really glad it's going to be back on TV soon. I'm going to definitely be diving right into that. But anyways, getting into this show today, we have some news to touch on and just really all sorts of other things to discuss. So I want to get things rolling, and I'll first dive right into some news, like always, and some of the latest developments in the baseball world, especially some of the recent news coming from the New York Mets. Again, this team has been in the news an awful lot in the offseason, and recently it has not been for a very good reason. But later on, I'll get into which players on their new respective teams I'm most excited to see on their new teams and who I think could make some of the biggest impacts this year. And then after I discuss the players on their new teams I'm most excited to watch, I'll get into the news and kind of what will happen, the what if you will, when the MLB is going to be able to issue the COVID-19 vaccine to players and personnel, and kind of how it will be administered to the players and what kind of issues might arise and might come up because of the slow rollout that we've already witnessed so far. And by the time the summertime rolls around, who knows what's going to happen, but I'll get into that in segment 3. And then be sure to stick around for the final segment today as I discuss what minor league baseball could look like with the virus this summer, obviously, and how getting them the vaccine could be even more of an issue. So make sure you stay right here for that final segment today. It's going to be a really good one. But like I mentioned, I want to dive into some of the moves that one of the New York teams have recently made, and that's the Yankees. I'm going to get into the Mets in a minute, but I want to first get into what the Yankees have been doing because, as we know, DJ LeMahieu, he re-signed with the Bronx Bombers, and I touched on that briefly in one of the previous shows I did. I believe it was a 6-year, $90 million deal, an awful lot of money for a guy that's going to be 33 this year. But they recently also went out and added to their pitching rotation as they signed former Cy Young Award winner Corey Kluber to a 1-year, $11 million deal. And I don't know what to think of this. I think that if Corey Kluber was even a fraction of the player that he was between 2014 and 2018, which he was absolutely sensational during that period of time, there was only 1 year from that 4 or 5 year span where he did not have at least 18 wins or more. That's a lot of wins to have on a consistent basis year after year after year. He's had a lot of injuries over the last couple years, although he has won 2 Cy Youngs. He's been in the All-Star a couple times. The last 2 years have not been very forgiving for the guy. I mean, this past year, he only appeared in 1 inning of work, and then he went out of the game and wound up having to get, I believe, surgery on his shoulder. So I know that that's been kind of an issue with him the last few years. His arm's kind of, I don't want to say that it's deteriorating, but it's definitely not as healthy and rejuvenated as it probably was when he was in 2014 or 2013 or 2015, whenever it might have been. But he's got the potential to be really, really good. I mean, he had 220-plus Ks in each of those years between 2014 and 2018. So his strikeout potential is through the roof. I mean, if you've got a guy that's able to strike out that many batters over a season, and then you're adding him to a pitching rotation with another guy that is capable of over 200 Ks a season, that's Garrett Cole, that's a pretty mean two-man tandem. But again, we have to remember, is Kluber going to be completely healthy? Is he even going to be any sort of remnant of his former self? Because if not, I don't think that's going to be a very wise move. Obviously, they only got him for a year, so if it doesn't work out in a year, they can just let him go, and they can kind of go on about their merry way. But the Yankees definitely needed to address pitching because James Paxton, he's getting older. He's actually a free agent. He did not have a very good year. I believe his ERA was over 6. And then Garrett Cole and Masahiro Tanaka, they're really the only two guys that had any sort of a decent season this year. And then 3 or 4 out of the other 5 guys or 6 guys that really got any sort of starting pitching this year their ERAs were all 4 and higher, actually almost nearing 5 in some cases. So the pitching definitely needs to be fixed because, I mean, coming in 14th in the league in team ERA last year, that's definitely not something that Brian Cashman's probably proud of. And so he did, I think, a wise move going out and getting somebody that does have a very good track record on the mound. But again, recently, not so much. And I know that, 2018 wasn't that long ago, but when you've got a guy that's, again, getting into his mid-30s and starting to approach that kind of time in his career where it might not be, the best time for him to get an injury because the recovery time might not be that great. And so as a result, it definitely could do a couple different things, and one of them is he could wind up not turning out very well for this Yankees team, and they could be back to square one where they were back in 2020. What's also interesting is I believe this is again, I don't know if this is true or not. It was just reported, I believe, that they signed him after just seeing him in a private workout. And I think that there's been other instances where we've seen kind of instances where guys get signed to, I don't know, small contracts, medium contracts, and they're off of these private workouts, but it's not a real game. It's not real live. It's not live speed. There's not a live hitter in front of him. There's not a crowd there. There's nothing at stake. It's just a workout. And so there's you always hear about a guy that's a good practice player or really good at hitting in BP, and he looks like a gold glover in IO, and then he winds up being terrible in the game. There is some sort of factor in that when the game lights and the big stage kind of comes on, some guys kind of falter. And so I wonder if, Kluber kind of being really, I would say, mostly out of baseball the last 2 years. I mean, I believe he's only had about 8 starts in 2 years. So clearly has not really had a whole lot of time under his belt since 2018. And as a result, I do wonder if he's going to be completely ready for this year and if he's even going to be a fraction of the player that he was before. But we'll have to see what's going on in the Empire State. But there's other news coming from the Empire State, and that is, again, the recently hired general manager of the New York Mets, Jared Porter, has now been fired after the resurfacing of some inappropriate text messages and a lot of unsolicited, actually all unsolicited text messages that he sent to a sports journalist, a female sports journalist, back in 2016. So first off, this guy's just completely out of line, right? I mean, I woke up, well, first off, again, this is being recorded on, as of right now, Tuesday, January 19th. So Monday night, I'm getting these reports on my phone that apparently this guy did this, that, and the other. I wake up this morning, and the first thing I see is that he got fired. And I was obviously very pleased that the Mets acted very swiftly and got rid of the issue which was at hand, was Jared Porter. And I kind of dived into the story and unpacked it a little bit. The guy sent over 60 messages to this journalist, and she never responded to these 60 messages. Now, there were other messages, I believe, before that, and I guess there was kind of this back and forth. They were sending pictures, and then he started sending inappropriate pictures, and that's when her responses kind of stopped. And then the messages that he was sending started to come out really, really rapidly, I would say. He continued to send more inappropriate pictures, and she continued to not say anything, and then eventually it got so bad that she finally spoke up and said, I don't think that this is appropriate. I'm not a fan of this. You need to stop. And I believe at that point he did stop, but there was other times where he kind of just kept pushing the envelope almost. And it's really sad because I think that there is this idea that there are some males in sports, not just baseball, but in sports that, I don't know if it's a power thing or whatever it might be, they get to a position of authority and they feel like they can do no wrong and that they are invincible. And I was watching ESPN today, and Jessica Mendoza, one of the color analysts for MLB Baseball and for ESPN, she's on Sunday Night Baseball, Monday Night Baseball. She does a great job with Carl Ravitch and all the other guys that call the baseball games. She came on and she made a lot of very fascinating points and honestly very valid points and very needed, I would say, points to be addressed to people in the public. And that is, women in sports, and she was saying herself even, it's hard to try and find a story or try to develop some sort of report because you trying, as a woman in sports, trying to give out your phone number, it's almost seen as kind of a gesture of, hey, I want to go out with you. And Mendoza was saying that she's had that happen to her a couple times, where she gives a player or somebody in the personnel or somebody in the organization her phone number just to follow up on a story and try and get more information, and it comes off as, oh, she wants to go to dinner with me. And again, there's got to be a line in the sand where there's obviously time to, you can do that outside or whatever, but then there's a time to work. There's a type of professionalism that needs to be carried out. And for women in sports, it's got to be so hard, this trying to go about your job on a normal daily basis, and then you have some males that are, again, not clearly thinking in the same thought process and really should again, be thinking in a totally different way. And as a result, we have instances like this where something comes out and then it just kind of snowballs from there, and you're just like, oh my gosh, how did this happen? And it's really sad, I think, that has to be something that women in sports have. It's very sad they have to deal with that, and it should not be a situation at all. They should be able to conduct their jobs as normally as possible, just like anybody else, right? I mean, they're not doing anything out of. I mean, they're going about following up on a lead, following up on a story, and there is nothing wrong with that. And so I really kind of get a little frustrated when women in sports continue to have to deal with that, because there shouldn't be any more need for that, right? We should all be adults. We all should be mature, and we should all realize that when we're on the clock at the job, that's, one thing, right? And we've got to be professional. And if you know that it's not going to transpire anywhere further, then why even press the envelope? Why even push the issue? And I think that as time goes on, there hopefully, and I'm very hopeful for this, that there will be more of an acceptance and more of an understanding that if a woman in sports gives you her phone number, she just wants to follow up on a story, and that's it. And just be professional. It's not hard to do, right? I really think that it's a very easy thing to do, to go about your job professionally. And so it was very, very unfortunate to hear that this all kind of came out, and especially the guy had just gotten hired not too long ago, about a month ago. But I mean, what do you expect when that happens, right? I mean, there's no way that you can expect that to just fly with passing colors. And I think that there needs to be, again, this was good that the Mets acted this quickly, kind of letting everybody know, I think, that there's absolutely zero tolerance for this, and there should be like that, right? And Jared Porter was doing a nice job with rebuilding this team, getting Francisco Lindor. He got James McCann. I mean, the team had been circling around so many different major free agents, and I think that it's really unfortunate that after all the really positive news that the Mets have had recently, that this is kind of the biggest story right now out of New York, and it doesn't show very good light, I think, towards the Mets. And could this have some ramifications for the Mets moving forward in this offseason, trying to go out and get other free agents? I know Trevor Bauer's been linked to them. George Springer, who I'll talk about later on, he's become kind of one of the big-time possible players that the Mets are trying to go after as well. So could this have some sort of effect on that? Maybe. I could definitely see that happening. And it just is very unfortunate that, this is kind of all transpiring, again, right before the season. And so that could really, I think, make or break some of these free agents as to where they might want to go. And the Mets might be at the very bottom of the list for a lot of other free agents out there. So a very unfortunate story, obviously, but glad that the story got out there. So then there is this awareness and that people are aware of this problem and that it was fixed. It was solved, and that now we can, the Mets can pursue a new GM. I think they were looking at their assistant GM, who was also a candidate for the job at the time when the job was open. So I think that as time goes on, there hopefully, and I really do believe that there will be a time where this won't have to be an issue. This won't have to be a problem. Everybody will understand their role, their job, and that there won't be any lines blurred or lines crossed, because that's where you really get a huge mess on your hands, which the New York Mets have right now. But I know that's probably, again, not the most positive-sounding news, but still something to discuss and something that needs to be corrected in sports in general. Certainly, male sports, people thinking that they can just take advantage of others based on their position in sports, that is not right at all, and that should not be the mentality that people have in sports, right? So hopefully that'll, again, eventually work its way out of, this line of work in this industry, because I think it'll make everything a lot more peaceful and just a lot more easy for everybody else, right? But again, some more exciting news. Well, let's get back into some of this trade talk, of the rumors, the free agency, this, that, and the other. The Pittsburgh Pirates, the team that resides in the city that I reside in right now, their former standout pitcher, I don't know if you want to call him their ace. I didn't really know who their ace was. You could say Trevor Williams. You could say Joe Musgrove. But now you can't say Joe Musgrove because he's been dealt to the Padres in a multi-team deal. Now, the deal involves the Mets, Pirates, and the Padres. And I think this is a really great move for Joe Musgrove and his career. And Musgrove, he's going to the Padres. And then the Padres are sending Joey Lucchesi, who was with the Padres, again, this past year. He's now going to the Mets. And then the Pirates are getting apparently a whole bundle, or I believe the term was a large package of prospects. So I have no idea what that means. I don't know how many. I don't know from which team. I believe there was a combination of both teams that were giving up a lot of prospects. I think it was the Padres that were giving up most of them, though, but I'm not quite sure. But I know that there is a lot going on in this trade. But I think that for Joe Musgrove, this is huge for his career, right? He's coming off a career season. He had the lowest ERA of his career with a 3.8. First time it was actually below 4 in his entire career. And I think that, again, he's stepping into an already good team. He's stepping into an already good rotation. And when you think about it, they've got Yu Darvish, Dinelson Lamet, Blake Snell, and now they'll have Joe Musgrove as their fourth starter. So their first 4 starters are all guys who had sub-4 ERAs. And Musgrove had the highest out of them this year, and he was, again, below 4. So right there, that's going to tell you how dangerous of a rotation this will be, not to mention when Mike Clevenger gets back to health, that's going to be a really scary 5-man rotation. And think about it, Joe Musgrove will be probably the 5th option on that rotation. And I know the Padres, they wanted to try and go out and get a little bit more depth, a little bit better balancing in the middle of that rotation, and I think they clearly did that. I mean, he's been a solid pitcher for the Pirates. I think that it's just been a team that has served him no justice because of the lack of offense they provide. I mean, he was 1-5 this past year, right? And he had a 3.8 ERA. He had a good bit of strikeouts, but that screams no offensive help, right? And the year before, in 2019, he had 157 Ks. It was his career high. So back-to-back years where he was getting career highs in one statistic or another, I think that is, again, a very good sign moving forward for him that he is on a very good career trend and that he is working in the right direction. And I think he'll finally be with a team that can win, and a team that can build up his record and that can make him look better than what he's been made out to be, I think, in the last few years. I think a lot of people had this I don't want to say negative idea of Joe Musgrove, but I know in Pittsburgh, I believe he came over in that Astros trade for Garrett Cole because he was with the Astros before. So I think a lot of people kind of associated him with that. And I know a lot of people in Pittsburgh are not happy about that Garrett Cole trade, which I wouldn't be either if I was a Pirates fan. But I think that this is going to be a revitalization of his career. And a lot of people have really been high up on this move. I know that there was some speculation that he might go to the Angels, but he wound up going to San Diego, but the same state, right? Now, the other guys involved, Lucchesi, he did not have a very good year. I mean, in all honesty, I think he might be kind of one of these players that was just kind of collateral, somebody extra to throw into the deal. He's going to be going to the Mets, but then the Pirates are going to be getting Hudson Head, and he might actually turn out to be a very nice player. I was doing a little research on him. A lot of scouts spoke very highly of him in the San Diego Padres farm system. He was on the team's 60-man roster or call-up team or whatever you want to call it from this past year. He batted .283 in rookie ball, and he also signed, I believe, a career-high deal for somebody coming into the minors, especially coming out of the 3rd round of the draft. This guy can really develop, I think. I think that if the Pirates are able to work with him and not keep him in the minors for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and he actually works his way up into the MLB and he actually gets thrusted onto the main stage and he actually plays, he could turn out to be a very, very, very pleasant surprise for the Pirates and for, I think, a lot of other people that are kind of down on the Pirates, like myself. It can maybe, again, breathe some life into this ball club and this franchise that's really struggled over the last years. So I would say ultimately I do really like this move for at least 2 of the 3 teams, right? Padres and Pirates. The Mets not so much, but I think the Pirates, they can hopefully build for the future if they are wise about it. But then the Padres, I mean, they get a guy that's a very durable, very reliable. I mean, hey, if that's your 4th starter in a 5-man rotation, I'm not mad about that. I'm not going to say anything. That's actually pretty good. So we'll see how his transition to San Diego goes because, again, it is going to be a much tougher league that he's going to be in as opposed to being in the NL Central. But I want to now close out the news segment with kind of the last thing I want to touch on, the recent development of where George Springer is going to sign. Because, again, there's been a lot of speculation going around the league that he could finalize his deal sooner rather than later. There's only 2 teams remaining, the Blue Jays and the Mets. And the Blue Jays, they must really want to spend some money. I mean, they offered him from what I read and from what I have seen, a deal that is worth 5 years, over $100 million. I believe the exact amount was around 115. So they really have no problem shelling out some money this offseason to some guys. I mean, I know that they offered DJ LeMahieu a 4-year, $78 million deal, and he turned that down. So they definitely they're here to play. They're here to stay, and they want to make some sort of noise in this offseason, try and get some pieces that I think are going to complement this up-and-coming young team that they do have a lot of talent. And I honestly would not be shocked if George Springer went there. I think that he could really benefit and really kind of not only help himself, but also help out this team because their outfield is stacked. I mean, they've got Lourdes Gurriel batted above 300 this year. Teoscar Hernandez had 16 homers and batted 289. And Randall Grichuk, he was their center fielder. He also had a very good year. He batted above 270. Now, Grichuk, although he did have a good year, he's not necessarily the player that Springer is. He doesn't bring the pop in his bat, the power in his bat that Springer has. He did have some decent power numbers this year, but again, just looking at kind of their career OPS numbers, Grichuk has only been over 800 of an OPS twice in the 7 years he's played. Whereas, on the other hand, George Springer, he's been over 890 for an OPS the last 2 years, and there's only been one season in his entire career where it was below 800 for his OPS. So when you think about that, they're exact opposites in terms of the power hitting. He's a 3-time All-Star. He had 14 homers and 32 RBIs this past year. He batted a career-high 292 in 2019. And honestly, depending on how and what the Orioles and Rays do and how they look this year, and also the Red Sox, because I think they have a lot to prove. I think the Red Sox, they're coming off a down year. I think people are expecting a lot out of them this year. And with all the injuries that they had, all the COVID issues, and then not to mention guys that were traded and are no longer with the team, David Price, Mookie Betts, over time, they've kind of lost a lot of guys from that really good 2018 team that they had. I'm curious to see what they'll do, but getting back to my original point, if all three of those teams don't really make any sort of improvements or any sort of progression, it's going to be the Yankees and the Jays. And I think the Jays could really hang with the Yankees, in my opinion. I mean, they showed it last year. The Blue Jays are, I think, an underappreciated team. They're not very appreciated, and I think they should be more because they have a lot of talented guys on their team. And, I mean, I just rattled off 2 guys in their outfield. And not to mention, you've got Kevin Biggio, you've got Vladimir Guerrero Jr., you've got Bo Bichette. You've got a lot of players that could be, Ryan Hyun-Jin Ryu. A lot of guys that can be very good. So I'm very hopeful for this Jays team. Hopefully they can come out on the right end of this and they can be the landing spot for George Springer. But if not, I think they could maybe land another big free agent if they play their cards right. We'll have to see. There's still some time before spring training starts. So the clock is ticking, but we're going to find out soon enough where everybody's going to wind up here. So that'll do it for us in this first segment, but don't go anywhere because when I get back from the commercial break, I'll jump into discussing which players on their new respective teams that I am most excited to see play next year, and which of these new faces in these new places will have some major impacts for their new ball clubs. Folks, stay right there because we'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA, to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenour with you all, and in our first segment, I hopped into some news and recent developments in the MLB world, including the recent firing of Jared Porter by the New York Mets. Make sure you stay right here, though, for the last segment today, where I'll get into what the future of the minor leagues looks like for this summer with the potential of the vaccine being issued publicly and what kind of issues they could run into. But I want to now stay in this segment and get into which players that have been traded or have signed to new teams that I'm most excited to watch on their new teams and who I think will have some of the biggest impacts on their new teams, right? I mean, there's been a lot of guys recently getting signed, a lot of guys getting traded recently. One team in particular, the Padres, have been very active with the trades, and actually that's going to lead me right into who I want to start with. That's Joe Musgrove. Yes, I know we're all probably very excited to see Yu Darvish and Blake Snell, but I feel like that goes without saying, right? We all know that we want to see them. We all know that this has been probably one of the biggest back-to-back moves that a team has made in a while, especially trade-wise. I mean, they go out and get 2 Cy Young caliber players, one that has won it, one that was a finalist. So, I mean, we all can, I think, agree that we want to see them in their new uniforms for their new team. But let's not forget about Joe Musgrove, right? I know I touched on him a little bit in the first segment because I think the guy sometimes gets forgotten. He kind of gets lost in the mix because he was with the Pirates. And I wonder if he's going to kind of run into this same phenomenon that a lot of former Pirates players have, where they leave the Pirates and then they wind up having great years. Look at Austin Meadows. He leaves, he gets traded for Chris Archer, and he winds up having an all-star year the next year. Tyler Glasnow, same thing. Then you've got Garrett Cole, same thing. And so I think that Joe Musgrove, he might be kind of one of these other Pirate players that is going to have some sort of rebirth almost in his career. And again, he's going to be part of a really big rotation. This rotation is going to have a lot of publicity around them. They're going to have all the eyes on them. So that means Joe Musgrove, he'll be under a microscope this year. But I feel like this could be the year that he should be under a microscope, because I think that he's right there on the cusp of having a career season in both ERA, strikeouts, record, everything. I mean, look at 2019, right? I already talked about it. He had his career high in strikeouts with 157. This past year, he had a 3.8 ERA, which is a career low for him. And his record, again, was not very good. But that, I don't think, reflects the pitcher that he was. I think it reflects the team that he was on. 1-5 when you have a 3.8 ERA, that's telling me a lot of things. Same thing when a couple of years ago when the Nationals weren't very good and Steven Strasburg, he'd have the most average record of a guy that had 200-plus Ks and a 2.5 ERA. It's because he had no run support. And I think that's why records for pitchers is very misleading. And that's why I don't try to look too much into it, because I think that speaks more of what kind of run support he was getting that day as opposed to how good of a pitcher he was. Because I think that's where the statistics kicks in, right? If somebody's got really good numbers and they've clearly been limiting guys on, you know, the offensive side of the of baseball, then I think that you can definitely say, all right, if the record's not good, it's got to be something with the team. I think that's what's even crazier is, again, I mentioned it earlier, he's going to be the fourth option in this rotation. And on a lot of other teams, he'd probably be the first or second option. So it's going to be a big difference for him in terms of role and where he's kind of viewed on this team. But I think that's going to be a good thing because he'll finally be in a winning environment. I mean, he's coming from a team that was 19th in the league in ERA. They clearly struggled. And now he's going to a team that was top 10 in the ERA category. So that's a huge difference, and that's a huge improvement in terms of the personnel he'll be around, and I think that could even raise the level of his ability and the level of production that he brings, because he's going to say, hey, I got to keep up with these guys. I got to bring my A game. So I'm really excited for Musgrove's career and his future there, and I think that it's going to be a very positive direction he's going to go in. So he's the first guy that I'm very excited to see. And the next guy, another former Pirate who's been traded to a fellow NL team, but just in a different division, Josh Bell. Now he's with the Nationals, and I think it's going to be another, you know, kind of similar case where we see a former Pirates career kind of take off after leaving the Pirates. And I just don't get what the deal is with the Pirates. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know if they're undervaluing their guys, if they're not utilizing them correctly. They're doing something wrong, and I just, to the life of me, don't know what it is. I want to know. I want to get to the bottom of it, because I've never seen so many players leave a team and then wind up having very good careers. Garrett Cole, I mean, he's been incredible since he's been off the Pirates. Tyler Glasnow, same thing. Austin Meadows, he had an okay year this past year, but the year before, he had a really good year. And the year before that, he had an even better year. So there's some sort of phenomenon going with the Pirates that I don't know. But with Josh Bell, there's another guy that's coming off not too long ago, a career year in 2019. He had 37 home runs, 116 RBIs. And then in 2017, he had a really big year. He had 26 homers and 90 RBIs. So if he follows that similar trend, you know, he was down in 2020, maybe 2021, maybe he's better in odd years, I don't know. But in 2019, he was top 10 in the NL in numerous hitting categories. He was 9th in homers, 7th in OPS plus, 6th in RBIs. And if you've got a guy on your team, if he can hit 116 RBIs, he's clearly an all-star caliber player. He can clearly be a consistent perennial all-star player every single season. It's just, I think, a matter of the team that he's on, right? And this is going to be a team where not all the attention will be on him. He's finally going to be surrounded with other talented players. He's going to have Juan Soto there and Trey Turner that I think more pitchers are going to be concerned with, as opposed to Josh Bell and Kyle Schwarber. But then, Kyle Schwarber will be there. So the attention won't all just fall on him. So now he'll be able, I think, to breathe a little bit, have a little bit of wiggle room, and he won't have to feel like, okay, I'm the guy that they're focusing in on, and I know that, and I'm going to have to really, really bring it today. Now he can just go out and he can hit. I will say, though, he's going to be going up against a lot of tough pitching this year. I mean, the Mets, they've added some good pitching to their already good rotation, right? They went out, they re-signed Marcus Stroman, and Jacob deGrom's already there. Noah Syndergaard. If Trevor Bauer winds up there, that's going to be a whole different ball game. And the Braves, you got Max Fried, Ian Anderson. Then you also have Charlie Morton, who signed with them in the offseason. So he's definitely going to be challenged. I think he's going to be challenged much more than he would have been in the NL Central, because especially this year with the NL Central, I think that they're going to be so down talent-wise. But I think that he's going to have a complete turn in his career this year with the Nationals, without question. So really excited to see what Josh Bell does. But I want to now talk about Lance Lynn, because he's been another guy that I think he's had, I would say, an up-and-down career, pretty steady career for the most part. But this is going to be, I think, one of the most massive helps that any team is going to get this year. Getting Lance Lynn on this Chicago White Sox team, they needed that third arm in their rotation. They needed that depth. They needed that veteran leadership. And that's what they got. Not to mention, there's a familiarity there with him and Tony La Russa. They've won before together. So there's that kind of connectedness that the manager and the pitcher have, which is always a really good thing to have going into the season, especially when they're two guys that are new to the team. That's always, I think, a little bit better. They can kind of help usher each other in and transition well together. He is old, but I think that, again, he's needed. Even though he is old, he's getting into his mid-30s. He's coming off a year where he was the leader in innings pitched, so he's got a lot of durability about him as a pitcher, which is a great sign. And not to mention, they clearly showed this past postseason, the White Sox did at least, that they need more pitching besides Giolito and Keuchel. They're not going to get it done with those two. They go out and get Lynn, and I think that was a very wise move because it expands things a little bit in their rotation. They also went out and got Liam Hendricks. I think that's going to really help them out tenfold in the bullpen, even though their bullpen was already really good. But Lance Lynn's coming off, again, a really big 2019 year. A lot of these guys had some huge 2019 seasons. He had a 246 Ks, which was clearly his career high. He was an All-Star in 2012, so he hasn't been an All-Star in a while, but he's definitely capable of being that good. I mean, if you had strike out 246 batters, just 220 let alone, you're going to be just fine, I think, as in terms of the ability that you have, the production you bring, and then the reception that you also have from other people and other teams. I think teams in the AL Central will fear Lance Lynn. They're going to be worried, and I think not only in the AL Central, but the entire AL, everybody's been put on notice. This White Sox team is going to mean business this year. And they already have a lot of talent. They already have a lot of guys that can play, and so I don't think they needed to necessarily go out and get wild new crazy free agent additions, right? I mean, I think the only one that they could maybe really benefit from would be somebody like a Marcell Ozuna, but they don't really need a George Springer. They don't need a DJ LeMahieu. They don't need a Trevor Bauer. They've got everything that they need. They just need to get maybe one more solid power hitter in that lineup to maybe balance things out a little bit, and then they'll be fine. I think that would literally be the one thing that they're missing. But Lynn is really, I think, pushed them pretty far up the ladder in terms of contenders for the World Series, at least in my opinion, just because it's another reliable arm in the rotation. And they already, again, they've got so much talent. They've got so much hitting. And so I think that's going to be the big separating factor. But really excited to see Lance Lynn play in his new team. Now the next guy, Francisco Lindor. Obviously really excited to see Lindor on a contending team finally, right? I know that when he was with the Indians, he did have some really good success team-wise. They were in the World Series, but it's been a couple years, right? It's been a couple years since they got back there. It's been a couple years since they were even, I think, I mean, I don't want to say relevant because they were still pretty solid for the most part, but it's been a couple years since they were a team that I think was feared by other teams, right? That 2016 Indians team, they were pretty good. So I think that now he's on a team that is, again, kind of in the right place at the right time. I know with the recent news coming out, probably not the greatest thing to have hovering over your team's head, but moving aside from that, Francisco Lindor, he's going to be a very big bright spot for them in that lineup. They're missing Robinson Cano this year, so I think that they go out, they get Francisco Lindor, much more reliable at shortstop than Ahmad Rosario was, at least with the bat. Second base position still trying to get figured out. They've got plenty of outfielders that they could work with. I mean, if you've got guys like Jeff McNeil, Michael Conforto, you've got Dominic Smith, you've got J.D. Davis, you've got Pete Alonso, then you throw in the pitching that they've got, then you throw in the fact that they got James McCann. This is going to be a fun Mets team to watch. This is going to be a really good Mets team to watch. I think he'll be a big piece to this dominant team. He's been one of the best hitting shortstops in baseball over the years, so I think that they were very, very wise to go out get a guy that's never batted, or he's only had, I think, 1 year in his entire career, this past year, where he batted below 270. He hit over 30 home runs from 2017 to 2019 in each of those 3 seasons. So that production could go back up there this year with the Mets. Not to mention, again, he's going to be in New York City. He's going to be in the limelight. He's going to be in a way bigger market than he was in Cleveland, and I think that's going to do a lot of wonders for his career as well. I hope that he doesn't kind of falter because of the big lights. I don't see that happening. He's a big-time player. He's capable of handling himself in that situation. So I'm really excited to see Francisco Lindor on this new-look Mets team and kind of how big of an impact he makes immediately. But I think him and Lance Lynn, right now, those are 2 guys that I think are going to make some of the biggest impacts on their new team. Now, getting into the last 2 guys before I get into my third segment, another Indians player, former Indians player, now with the Kansas City Royals, Carlos Santana. I'm excited to see this guy because this Royals team needs some sort of power in their lineup. They need some sort of life, if you will. 2019, he was an all-star, and he's been in this division his entire career except for 1 year where he was in the NL East with the Philadelphia Phillies, so he's very familiar with the teams. He's very familiar with the personnel that he'll be going up against. Sure, a couple teams have added some new guys here and there, but for the most part, he's pretty familiar with everybody in the division, so that is a good thing. And not to mention, he's a very patient hitter. And I think that this Royals team needs guys to get on base. They need power hitters that are patient at the plate. He's led the MLB once in walks before. He led the AL this past year in the same category. So he's clearly capable of doing that. And like I mentioned, the Royals have literally nobody that has any power. They had one guy in their entire starting lineup that batted double digits in home runs, and that was Salvador Perez. He was the only one. Nobody else had anything higher than 8 home runs. So right there, that tells me a lot of things, that Carlos Santana's bat was a major, major need for this team. I think that also he's going to help breathe major life into the middle of that lineup that they've got. I mean, they have a couple guys that batted 270, 280, but then they've got a couple guys that batted 205, 220. Not to mention, if Santana, if he wants to play the DH, I think the Royals would be more than happy to put him there. I mean, Jorge Soler, he played terrible in 2020. He only batted 228. He had 8 homers in 43 games, so not a whole lot of production out of Soler. And so I think that's why maybe they went and got Santana. Obviously, if he plays in the outfield, I don't think that's going to be a major issue. But let's be honest here, with Alex Gordon retiring, they get Michael A. Taylor. I don't really see Santana going out in the outfield. I know Whit Merrifield kind of floats in between infield and outfield. He can play second. He can really play in a lot of different positions. I think that Santana either sticks with first or sticks with DH, because if he sticks with DH, we could see kind of a similar change in his career and his kind of the overall reception of him, similar to Marcell Ozuna. And if he can do that, if he can kind of have that kind of breakout year from going from a position, an everyday position player to then a DH, I think that we'll see an uptick in his career big time. So I'm excited to see Carlos Santana in his new uniform, and really just excited to see this Royals team. I mean, I think that they've made quiet moves, but I think the moves that they made were wise. I think they really fit that team well, and as a result, I think that they will surprise a lot more people this year than I think people are thinking. And in all honesty, I don't know about a major playoff run, but I could maybe see them getting to the playoffs if they play their cards right. It's just going to depend on the rest of the division, who clearly the Indians have seen a lot of loss in the last couple months, and then you have the White Sox to deal with. The Twins have been virtually non-existent in the offseason, so I don't really know if they're going to be any sort of a factor. And then the Tigers are kind of just they're there, right? They're the Tigers. Maybe one day they'll get back into it, having A.J. Hinch there, but right now I don't see that. So the Royals, they could be in a good spot for this season. Final guy I want to touch on, one of the more recent signings, Corey Kluber. I mean, very similar to Santana. I think he's going to breathe life into this Yankees rotation. You've got J.A. Happ. He's getting really old. He's 37. He's coming off a pretty solid season, below 4 ERA, but he's still 37, so towards the end of his career. But then really after Masahiro Tanaka and Garrett Cole, the rotation just jumps up. It just shoots up from above a 4 ERA for the last 3 guys, Jordan Montgomery, D.V. Garcia, and James Paxton. All 3 had atrocious ERAs this year. Paxton's a free agent, so they will probably let him go, and they'll fill this void with bringing in Kluber. I think that he's got superstar potential. He's a 2-time Cy Young Award winner, so again, there's no question that he can be some of the top pitchers in baseball, that he can compete at the highest level possible. Getting 2 Cy Youngs is no easy feat. That is not an easy thing to do. And he was able to do that in a very short amount of time. So if he can get back to any sort of form of that and find any sort of second win in his career, this Yankees team is going to be a force to be reckoned with, because they already got all the hitting that they want. They've re-signed DJ LeMahieu. So if they can have a big year out of Corey Kluber, Garrett Cole, they can get other help from the pitching, and then everybody else does their part hitting-wise, this Yankees team is going to be right back where they were this past year, if not even better. And look at Corey Kluber's wins. I know I said that that's a little misleading, but at times you can say that a pitcher was the reason why they won, not all the time, but he was an 18-20 win winner in, from 2014 to 2018 in each of those seasons except for one. So he's capable of having a high win total. He's capable of being a 200-plus K strikeout pitcher. So that's another thing that needs to be factored into. And if he's side by side and paired up with Garrett Cole, watch out at AL East, because that's going to be a heavy, heavy, heavy duo to try and get out of. So really excited for a lot of different guys that are going to be on new teams this year, kind of new look franchises, new look ball clubs, and what it's going to look like, not only for those teams, but the overall league, the overall divisions that they're in. Are we going to see any major shakeups in who usually is atop the leaderboard, and maybe now we'll see a little bit of a change, right, with the Padres and the NL West? Maybe they're the ones that take the crown for the NL West champions this year over the Dodgers. Who knows? I think that there's a lot of things that could still be figured out. There's obviously a couple more guys that have yet to be signed. But I think out of all the guys I just mentioned, like I said, Joe Musgrove, I think that he could have a really big impact on his team. But I think that the biggest impacts are definitely going to be Lance Lynn and Carlos Santana. I think in the long run, they're going to have some of the biggest impacts on their teams because of just the sheer value that they bring. And then not to mention Francisco Lindor, all three of those guys. I think in my rankings, it would probably go Lance Lynn first, because they needed that third arm. I would then say very close is Francisco Lindor, because they already had a bunch of guys that they could play in any sort of position and they could kind of move them around. They had the pitching already figured out. So I would say Francisco Lindor and Lance Lynn are the two closest. And then not too far behind, but a little bit behind, is Carlos Santana, just because of how good he can be and how good he's been recently, and then what this Royals team needs. And they need that kind of player in their lineup, and that's who he is, a power-hitting, DH first baseman type player. Maybe put him in the outfield, probably not. But again, I think that those three are going to have some big impacts, but I think all these guys will eventually at some point or another. But I'm also really excited for Joe Musgrove. I hope that he has a great career in San Diego, because I really don't think he was given justice and really, I think, given his due credit while he was in Pittsburgh. The guy can play. The guy can flat-out pitch. So very interesting year we have ahead of us, and I'm very excited to see these new faces in these new places. So that will close things out here for us in our second segment on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. And coming up after the commercial, I'll get into what this summer will hold for the MLB with the rollout of the vaccine, and what kind of issues could arise if the issuing of the vaccine becomes any sort of a problem. Folks, it's been a lot of fun so far, but we got a lot more to go, so don't change that channel. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Great to have you all here still with me today. Jack Ridenauer again. And in the previous segment, I got right into sharing which players who are on new teams this year that I'm most excited to see play on their new teams But I want to now get right into sharing some thoughts and kind of unpacking what this summer could look like with the potential rolling out of the COVID-19 vaccines and what kind of issues could arise for the MLB and the league administering the vaccine to players, personnel, really everybody, honestly. I mean, I'm going to get into it, but the MLB could play a big role, I think, in the administering of this vaccine, depending on what kind of happens. And then in my next segment, I'm going to get into kind of what's going to happen with the minor leagues. Not so positive of an outlook, I would say, that I have for the minor leagues. But again, I'm going to get into that in a little bit. But staying in this segment, recently, as of right now, kind of like just getting everybody up to speed. As we all know, the vaccine has been slowly starting to roll out. There's been a couple different healthcare companies that have been able to form contracts and then get vaccines out, and they haven't really rolled it out to the level that they wanted to at this point. I believe they wanted to have at least 20 million doses out to people that were in the category of essential people to get them within the first 2 weeks of the vaccine being out, but they only, I believe they only got 12 million out. So 8 million shy of where they wanted to be. But the MLB, this is where I was mentioning how they could become kind of a very big piece in this. Apparently there's been a couple teams already. I believe it's Citi Field, I believe Dodger Stadium. Some baseball teams might wind up housing vaccine sites and being these massive places where people can go and get vaccines, and kind of how we've seen these testing sites almost, and you can kind of just drive up. Now we're going to kind of see the same thing, but at baseball stadiums. So the MLB could be a very big piece in this, especially with the vaccine coming out relatively close to, I would say, by the time everybody could get it in the summertime, somewhere in the warmer months. But what else the MLB is trying to do, or could potentially do, is they could become a private provider of the vaccine. And basically what could happen is they could then be a company that is administering the vaccine to its employees. So they would go and do it for the players and the personnel, so on and so forth. And this would be, I think, something that could definitely help in the quickness of the process, getting it over with and just getting people through it, and if the MLB can just administer it. But the problem is it won't be out in that time frame in which the MLB could then apply to become, because they have to apply and they have to make sure that they can house the vaccine at an appropriate temperature, because I believe it has to be at a very cold temperature. So they have to be able to prove that they can house it at an okay temperature, that they can administer it to enough players and personnel, so on and so forth. But there's other logistical issues that are really starting to occur right now with, again, the vaccine slowly rolling out right now as it is. I mean, imagine once the summertime comes around. And so as recently what they've started to do is started to broaden the age of range to getting vaccinated, kind of changing the guidelines for vaccination and so on and so forth. And my question here, though, is this going to allow baseball players to fall into a certain category that can allow them to almost jump the line? There's been a lot of talk about, should athletes be able to have first priority? Should athletes be able to go ahead of just the general public? And a lot of people are kind of split on this. And this is where I kind of get into what this summer could hold for baseball, because I think that although there's been a lot of positive things coming about, people wanting to get the vaccine, there's going to be some skepticism, and there's going to be people that are going to be against it, and baseball players will most likely fall in that same category. There probably is right now, some baseball players that are a little bit skeptical of wanting to get the vaccine, rightfully so. I mean, it's been, kind of rushed. A lot of people have said it hasn't come out in a time, over time and in a patient way. It's been kind of rushed in a little bit of an impatient process due to the fact that we have this global pandemic and it's really wreaked havoc everywhere. But should players be allowed to jump the line? I'm split on this. Maybe yes, because in some regards they could be seen as essential workers, because essentially they fall into the category of, I would say, entertainment. And as we saw earlier on in the springtime of last year, no sports, it was a really tough time for a lot of people. I think we started to realize what the lack of sports was really doing to our society as a whole. I think that there was also a lot of kind of awakening moments in that we could kind of steer our attention towards and kind of not be distracted about. But at the same time, it was a very, very difficult, dismal time, and a lot of people were out of jobs and they didn't have jobs. So as a result, should players be able to jump the line? On the other side, I don't think so, because I don't see them being any higher than the health officials that have put their lives on the line for, fighting this virus. I don't see them getting over, probably military personnel, people that are, everybody that I think is protecting our country in one way or another, either physically or mentally, emotionally, health-wise, whatever it might be, right? National security-wise, they should get it first because they are the ones that are protecting us. Then athletes and everybody else should fall in line. There's been a couple other public personas like Charles Barkley who's been outspoken saying, they fall in a certain tax bracket. That's why they should jump the line. I'm not sold on that, right? I think that, okay, if you say that, does that mean that the guy that started a really good company and he's in that also tax bracket that he gets to jump the line, but he's nobody knows who he is. It's just because they have a public persona and they have a public image. So that's the problem. I'm very split on this. I honestly am kind of leaning towards they shouldn't jump the line, and a lot of other leagues have agreed to that. They've also said, we're not going to make our players go in front of other people. We're going to wait, and that's going to be the other thing is this vaccine is going to take some time to get out to the public. So could the MLB have to, in the middle of the season, once it is available to everybody and the players can get it, are they going to have to change some rules? Are they going to have an issue with guys wanting to get the vaccine and starting to, and that's the other problem, right? The MLB has already said that they're going to bring in experts on the virus, experts on the vaccine, and try to teach the guys and try to teach the players and the personnel what this virus and what this vaccine is all about so they can kind of have some peace in mind, because a lot of people are very, again, like I said, they're very hesitant to get it, and the players are going to fall under that same category, and they're going to have to figure out a way in order to teach the guys in a quick enough manner. So then maybe, hopefully, if enough people get vaccinated, enough players get vaccinated, enough personnel gets vaccinated, they can go back to having fans in the stands. There can be this going back to somewhat of a normalcy. But the problem is, again, not just the players and personnel getting vaccinated, but the general public. That's going to be a whole nother issue. How will the general public view this, and are they going to want to be in a big rush to get vaccinated? Could that thinking and could that kind of worry prevent and kind of delay almost the return to fans being in the stands because people are very hesitant? Because a lot of people have mentioned the only way that we're going to really get back to some sort of normalcy is when a certain population number or a certain percentage of the population or something like that is able to get the vaccine and have become vaccinated, and there has been an overall general built-up immunity to the virus. So once that happens, then there can be some sort of normalcy, but it will be getting to that point. And there are some things that I could see occurring and some issues that I could see arising along the way. Obviously, not enough people being or wanting to be vaccinated by baseball season, so that will definitely delay things. Like I mentioned, fans will probably not be able to come back in full capacity. And I think that it's going to take time for that, honestly. Even if people do kind of welcome this vaccine with open arms, it's still going to take time because it's going to just take a lot of time for everybody in the country and everybody in the world to be able to have issued a vaccine for them so they can have it. It's going to take time. I mean, like I mentioned, they were 8 million shy of where they wanted to be the first 2 weeks in. So imagine where they want to be by July and where they're having to start already. I mean, they're already off to a slow start. So it could take a little while. Maybe this might be another summer where we don't have many fans in the stands, if any, right? There might be some states, and that will be the other thing. It's going to depend, I think, on the states and the state regulations and the state laws and so on and so forth. What is that going to then entail? Is that going to delay the process for some teams? So some guys are going to be able to get the vaccine and some guys aren't going to be able to get the vaccine. And if that's the case, could then some players say, well, they haven't been vaccinated and I'm not going to go out and risk my health. I'm not playing. So then now there's this kind of disconnect and this divide in the MLB based on which states could possibly get the vaccine before other states. And then that will cause, again, other issues and it'll kind of build up. And then that's a lot of what's going on right now, right? There's a lot of uncertainty in these guidelines being changed into who's going to be administered what, at what point, who's going to be first, who's going to be last, who gets top priority, who doesn't. There's so much juggling right now, and I feel like at any moment, there could be more and more balls being juggled in the air and just thrown at the juggler over and over again, and there's just all of this stuff going on at once. And in all honesty, if the MLB does become that private provider and is able to administer to its employees, it could possibly slow down the process to get the players vaccinated because they'll have to go through They'll have to go through permits and making sure that they can apply to get permission to do this. It'll start to snowball, and it'll become more and more of a headache, I think, than it would be of a good thing, and it will just delay the process and push it back even further and further. My other thing is this. Could we see a point where at some point or another we see players kind of, I don't want to say revolting, but kind of forming a group or kind of a stance, a coalition, whatever you want to call it, and saying, we don't want to get vaccinated. And that's why they're bringing this virologist, and this other person that's going to be talking about the vaccine to them. But there could still be some hesitation. There could be some resentment towards it, and some could say, I don't want to take it. And then now you've got an entirely different problem on your hands. If there's fighting inside of the MLB with this, we already saw it last year with the MLB Players Association wanting a certain amount of money, a certain amount of games, going back and forth with the league. Could we see something very similar this summer with guys wanting to get vaccinated? Kind of this back and forth. The MLBPA says no. The MLB says, well, you have to, and if not, you're going to have to wear a mask, and so on and so forth. And if that, again, stalls and that gets delayed, I mean, who knows how long it will take for everybody, we can look at it two ways. We can look at a half glass full. All right, we've got vaccines. Good. We just have to get them to people. That's the half glass full. Well, if we get them to people, are people going to want it? Are players going to want it? And if not, that could even drag this out even further. Masks could continue to be a thing for even longer. Fanless games could continue to be a thing for even longer until everybody has been fully vaccinated or at least fully immune. And I just am very curious to kind of see how long it will take for full stadiums to go back to capacity, and if people have been vaccinated, will they not have to wear masks, and people who haven't been vaccinated, they have to wear masks. I saw a lot of things actually reading some articles saying that there could be an instance where it might be mandated that you have to get vaccinated to play baseball or to go to a game or to be on a sports team or to go to school, anything like that. I mean, you see all these vaccines that kids have to get still nowadays, and things that, I've been vaccinated for, I'm sure a lot of people have been vaccinated for, that you had to go do certain things you had to get those vaccines to go and do these certain things, going to school, going on a field trip. I remember when I was a kid, I had to have a certain vaccine to go to this field trip for whatever reason. It was just a requirement. So that could become a thing down the road in just overall society. But in sports, there could be instances where parents say, hey, I don't want my kid to be vaccinated. I don't trust it. And they don't get to play sports. And the same thing going with fans in the stands. Maybe fans in the stands, it'll be a very slow progression into that because people say, I don't want to get vaccinated. I don't feel comfortable doing that. And so you might start out seeing a very, very, very small amount of fans in the stands. It's going to be a really interesting summer. I think that we are slowly coming out of the woods on this, and there is definitely light at the end of the tunnel. But it's going to really take a lot of trust, a lot of communication, and a lot of belief in not just the health and safety guidelines and the health officials and everything else like that, but just from people in general, from the players, from the personnel, everybody that's working in the MLB, managers, coaches, catchers, first basemen, everybody, you name it. Everybody's got to be on board with this, because if not, I think that's going to be, a whole nother issue. It's going to continue on. It's going to just keep dragging out. These teams will continue to lose money a lot, and I've mentioned this before, teams in certain divisions, in certain geographical situations in the country, they could be itching to get the vaccine so they can get some fans back in the stands. And there could be some pushing from certain teams more so than others. So, hey, we can get fans back in the stands. We're losing more money than these other East Coast and West Coast teams because we don't have the sheer A, population that they do, and B, just the media attention that they have and the overall market size. And so there could be some secret pushing of, teams in the AL and NL Central saying, hey, let's get these guys vaccinated. Let's get this out. And there could be some other resentment on other team sides saying, I don't know about that. So then there's going to be a lot of, like I mentioned, juggling, kind of figuring out what's what and who's who and who wants what. So until people are on the same page, I think that this summer, if you do see fans in the stands, I'm not going to say many, and I've mentioned this before in a buy it or deny it segment. I don't see over 50% of the teams in the MLB having fans in the stands this summer, sheerly because of the time in which we're going to be able to have the vaccine, the overall hesitation of people wanting to have the vaccine, and it's going to be, who knows? And then what are the guidelines going to be once you get vaccinated, right? What's it going to be, kind of the first initial steps after? Is it going to be quick, immediate normalcy, or is it going to be a slow progression back into that? Who knows? So we do have some time to figure it out, but as long as there's some baseball, as long as guys are staying healthy, and as long as there can be some sort of sports action on TV, I'm not going to complain. If I have to go through another summer of not being able to go to a baseball game, I'll suck it up. I don't love it, but it's better than nothing, right? It's better than when we didn't have any sports, because that was a brutal, brutal time. But anyways, that'll do it for this segment, folks. Thanks again for sticking around. Stay right there. We'll be right back after this commercial break for the final segment today, where I'll dive into what summer holds for the minor leagues in regards to the vaccine and what kind of issues the minor leagues could see arising for them. Don't go anywhere, everyone, because we've got one last segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup final.
Listen now.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for the final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer still with you. And in the previous segment, I got right into discussing the future of MLB baseball this summer with regards to the vaccine and people being issued it in time, and whether players and personnel will be able to get it earlier or at a later time. And now I want to move into the minor leagues' future this summer and what's going to happen with the vaccine rollout, because I do not have... And again, the last segment I was not super high up on the fact that people are probably going to be able to go back to games this summer and that everybody's going to be vaccinated and players are going to all be on the same page about it, this, that, and the other. My outlook for the minor leagues is a little bit more bleak, and I hate to say that, but it's just because there's not as much funding, there's not as much support, the amount of fan support and the amount of fan attendance that is relied upon by these minor league teams is insane. And if there's, again, no fans in the stands, which I can only imagine if the majors is only having a couple fans in the stands, if any, if people are able to get vaccinated and the vaccine gets issued to people publicly, I can only imagine what minor league games would be like, right? I don't really envision a very positive kind of a result in that, because not many people are going to want to go. Plus, it's a smaller stadium, so people are going to be packed in there even more. And if you try to spread people out, you're going to have an even thinner attendance than I think that a lot of teams would normally have. And as of right now, though, what has been kind of happening is the AA and everybody below the AA baseball, kind of the farm system leagues, they're not going to be making a spring training appearance until the AAA level and the major league players all leave the spring training facilities. So once AAA and major leagues are out of the way, then AA and below can all go into spring training. So who knows when that'll be, right? I mean, they're literally second in line. They're having to wait for the AAA and major league guys to get the go-ahead. And who knows when they'll get the go-ahead. There's been talks about the MLB possibly delaying spring training for everybody. There's been talks about spring training getting pushed back, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of kind of wishy-washy uncertainty right now with what's going to be happening with the minor leagues, because it's all dependent upon the major leagues. Now, what the major leagues has done is, I've mentioned this before, they started their own professional developmental league, and they've assigned, or at least invited, 120 different teams to join this pro development league. But they haven't assigned these teams yet to these major league affiliates or to really anywhere, because they're still figuring out this year. They can't go to step 2, 3, 4, and 5 without getting through step 1, and right now they're stuck in the mud on step 1, and that's the problem. Now, here's the other thing, right? If major league players can get it quick, fast, and efficient, are minor league players going to also have those same benefits? Are they going to have those same resources? I don't know. I really do question if they will have that same access that major league guys will get, especially if, let's just play out a scenario. Let's say somehow, some way, athletes and professional sport players are allowed to jump the line and get vaccines first, right? The MLB guys go and get it, major league, or, NBA, NHL, NFL, whatever. Is that going to count for the minor league guys? They're still pro athletes, but they're not pro athletes. So is there going to be some sort of kind of dancing around this fine line, what is considered pro and what is considered not? And I wonder if the MLB players, if they are able to get issued it, are they going to have, and in a quick, efficient manner, are they going to have that same kind of response for minor league guys? Because let's face it, this past couple years, we've all been talking about, and there's been, news going around about how minor leaguers want to get paid more. So there's a lot of minor leaguers, and I've talked to some. They're not too happy with their pay grade and what they get paid on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis. So could this be something else to add the fuel to the fire of, okay, minor leaguers, you're going to have to wait in line. The major leaguers are going to go before you, and we may or may not be able to get to all of you minor leaguers by the end that we're done with all of this. So could then that, again, kind of stoke the fire a little bit, and people say, hey, this is really getting on my nerves, and then we start to kind of see more and more minor leaguers being a little bit more outspoken and not being too happy because, we could see possibly an uproar for the minors, I think, if there are any issues in terms of who can get issued what and at what time. Because if there's not kind of a deciphering or kind of a deciding, a differentiating factor in who gets what, then that's going to lead to so many problems, so many issues. Because if it's just anybody, then there's going to be are we going to even be able to have enough? And that's why they have to differentiate who gets what first, because they have to go through the top priority. So, and it's unfortunate that the minor leaguers aren't the top priority because they honestly put in just as much work as a lot of major league guys, and they just get a fraction of what they deserve. But that's just how minor league is, because it's underfunded, it's not as supported, it's not as followed, and it doesn't have as big of a fan base as major league teams do. There's a lot of minor league teams that nobody knows about, right? And I also wonder if minor league teams could be sites of vaccination. Could they potentially, the MLB, let's say somehow the MLB becomes a public provider and they say, okay, well, because the minor league teams, all of these affiliates, they fall underneath our umbrella, kind of our business umbrella, if you will, we're going to just start administering to all of these vaccination sites. And in all honesty, I think that would be very interesting because there's going to be so many teams, 120 teams. That is 3 times the amount of MLB teams there are. So there's going to be even more sites to have vaccinations, which I think could, again, allow more people to get vaccinated just in the general public. But my question is, could we see another summer where we're going to have no fans in the stands? Or even worse, could we see another canceled season? That, I think, could be something that could really be detrimental to baseball. Because if you have another canceled season, think about it. You're going to have prospects and players that were drafted in 2018, 2019, who've had very little action at any professional level, not just major leagues, but minor leagues too. So you're going to have all of these guys that have had, I was reading one story, I can't remember his name, he was an Orioles draft pick back in 2019. And since 2019, because of this pandemic, and then, who knows what's going to be happening with this year, I believe the story is if there's no season in 2021 and he doesn't play, that'll be basically a year and a half, 2 full years of not playing baseball, and he'd only have about 200 pro plate appearances in his career. So think about how far behind talent-wise, skill-wise, a guy would be not playing in a major league, live action pro league game. And if they're not going to be able to play pro baseball at that speed, at that level, and they're out of it for a while, that could really hinder, I think, some guys' ability and some of their talent and some of their kind of overall, I would say, production, in all honesty, and how some of these teams are going to view them, how they're going to be scouting them. It could really throw some things off. And if they can't play at their home stadiums, I would say maybe a second alternative. Could they go to the spring training sites? Could they go to Florida and Arizona? Listen, it's 120 teams. I know that would be a lot and probably be a massive headache, but Florida's a pretty big state, and so is Arizona. So you could have, 60 teams one place, 60 teams in another, or split them up 30-30, 30-30 in both states, and, kind of spread them out as you see fit, and then just roll from there and see what happens. I think that could be something interesting, but again, going back to that, that's kind of like a bubble-like thinking, and it's just hard to put baseball in a bubble, but there is a lot of access to fields, and there's a lot of access to training facilities down in those 2 states. So there could be some things that could be done with the minor leagues. It's not really going off to a hot start right now with them being delayed and things being kind of set back a little bit and so on and so forth. So once things are kind of in motion and we can figure out, okay, are they going to have a season? If so, when are they going to start? And if so, are they going to have fans? How are they going to absorb that hit? But with them falling under the MLB policy now, I don't know if it's going to be a massive hit that they're going to be taking, because in all honesty, they could probably just absorb it through being with the MLB. And I just feel that if these cases continue to surge on, if people don't get vaccinated or people are reluctant to getting vaccinated, this could just drag on, and we could have another season where minor league baseball is canceled. And I think that could even not only just set guys back talent-wise and just overall for their game speed and their game just quickness and sharpness, I think that it's going to deter some guys from pursuing their dreams of being a pro baseball player. They're going to say, well, if this is just going to keep dragging out and I'm not making any money, why am I sticking around and doing this? What's the point of that? And that would be the saddest thing, I think, in that situation. Just guys saying, you know what, to heck with it, I'm throwing in the white towel. There's no point of doing this. Because they seem to have no way of getting out of this situation because there's no seasons, year in, year out. But I really think that if this were to happen again, I think that it wouldn't stretch to a third year. It couldn't. I'm thinking about it now. I'm just trying to visualize if there was no minor league season this year and the third straight year, it couldn't happen. It would just, guys would be, again, so discouraged. Teams would be so far behind. Teams would be not up to speed with a lot. I mean, it would cause a lot of issues, and it would just be a snowball effect. So I really do think that they need to figure out a way to get this vaccine to minor league guys as efficiently as the major league guys. In all honesty, they should just put them all down in some big training facility and just say, listen, we're going to just house you guys for 2 weeks, and we're going to just go through every single one of you. You're all going to get tested. And if you don't want to get tested, that's fine. But we're going to have a 2-week period where everybody that gets tested can get tested. And depending on how many guys get tested, and if it's enough people, and then enough of the general population gets tested, then maybe there can actually be a quicker turn back of fans coming back in the stands and saying, okay, everybody did what they had to do. We got enough people to do it. Some people were still a little reluctant. That's okay. That's their decision. But there was enough that we could still roll on and kind of get back to some sort of normalcy. That's just going to have to depend on when this vaccine can get out and when everybody can have, first dibs of it. Here's the other thing, right? Back to Charles Barkley's comment about depending on the tax bracket you fall in, minor league players are not going to fall in that tax bracket that major league guys are. And that's another reason why I think that the major league guys will get first dibs over minor league guys, even though they're both professional players. And I think that could, again, cause a major rift. The minor league guys could be very upset about that. Quite frankly, I would be. Right? I mean, if you're going to go off of that basis, but yet everybody's still a pro athlete and you're still making money, what difference would it make of what tax bracket you're in? Just because you're making millions and millions of more dollars than me, I'm still putting in the same amount of work that you are to try and attain the same exact goal, and I'm getting paid a fraction of it just because that's how it is. And so I think that could cause a big time disgruntlement from players in the minor league system that would not be happy about these changes. So I really do hope that we can figure something out for minor league guys because they're already having, I think, a tough time as it is. Their entire season was canceled last year. They're getting news that the spring training for some guys in the lower levels are going to be delayed, and it's going to set guys back. These guys that are top-tier prospects, they're out of live action baseball for 2-3 seasons. What's that going to do to their development, their overall development, right? That's going to stunt it, I would have to think. And unless there's some way that they can figure out how to just play neutral-sided games for this pro development league somewhere, somehow, no fans, and just in these remote areas, then maybe it could work. But again, you go back to how are they going to get around? It's going to be all traveling, and that's the biggest problem is this cross-state, cross-country traveling that is the real issue, and that people from one place, they're bringing it to another place, and so on and so forth, and that's how we've seen outbreaks occur in lots of different leagues right now. I mean, the NBA is going through right now. The MLB went through it last year. The NFL went through it this past season. So there's a lot of different innuendos that we're going to have to deal with and kind of, go through in order to try and get this everybody vaccinated. But at the same time, it's like, okay, if we're going to have to go through these things, what's going to suffer? And it could be an entire season. It could be somebody's, opportunity to shine and really rise through the ranks and impress some scouts and maybe turn his career around and have a successful career. I mean, going back to kind of how college guys were doing it, being able to have another year under their belt, how awful would it have been if this was your senior year and you wanted to make a big impression for an NFL, MLB, NHL, NBA team, and you didn't have that senior season, and you had a really good junior year or whatever, or you had a great sophomore year, you had a bad junior year, and you want to bounce back with a big senior year. The same goes for guys in the minor leagues. You had a really good 2019, you want to build on it, but you can't. You had your season canceled in 2020, and then 2021, who knows? And then coming into 2022, if things, I'm hoping, are back to somewhat of at least 60% normalcy, how far behind are you going to be, right? I mean, timing at the plate, timing with pitching, timing with fielding, timing with throwing, everything. You're going to be completely off. So there's going to be a lot of uncertainty, I think, with the minor leagues more than the major leagues, because the major leagues will just get first dibs. Once they kind of figure out what to do with the major leaguers, I think that they'll be able to have a very quick and efficient plan for the minor leaguers, because I think they are a little bit more eager to get back to playing than major league guys, although I would say major league guys are also eager to get back to playing. The minor league guys, they haven't played in over a year, coming up on 2 years. So they are probably even more eager to get back out there than the major league guys. It's just a hunch I have. But who knows what happens, and I hope, but hopefully, and I'm hoping they can get back to some sort of a consistent normalcy so then we can finally have, again, fans in the stands. But most importantly, the minor league guys can get their fair shot. They can get their fair opportunity to shine. They can get their fair opportunity to display and showcase their skills and really allow major league scouts to know who they are as players and figure out, okay, where does this guy fit on our team? Does he not? And it could fulfill some player's lifelong dream of being a major leaguer, and who knows? He could be the next big thing. We have no idea. So a lot of things to figure out, but hopefully the minor leaguers get it figured out. But I hope the major leaguers get it figured out first, so then the minor leaguers can then follow in suit. But anyways, that'll wrap it up for us here today, folks. Thanks again for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask you to please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us out. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we'd really appreciate it. And until next time, everybody, have a wonderful day and keep on checking out some more baseball news, because we're going to be bringing you all the latest and greatest baseball news. Have a fantastic evening.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.